All right. Guys, welcome back to another episode of That's an Awful Take podcast. I'm your host with the most, Price Mancer, here to make the most out of your day. Hope everyone is having a wonderful week. Good Thursday. It's been a crazy one. I'm not going to lie. It has been super crazy. We're going to ignore that. Anyways, it's been super crazy. I can't lie, guys. It's been a crazy week, but we're here. We made it to Thursday. So, it's time for another episode of the greatest podcast on planet Earth. So I'm just so excited to bring you guys this great stuff, this great information that we have planned. As you can tell from the title, it's Mock Draft 4.0 today. So, we had 1.0, 2.0, 3.0, and 4.0. This is the first mock draft I've done post free agency. So it's going to, kind of be based off of the moves we've seen before from free agency. So it'll be a pretty fun one. We're also going to try and go over the Final Four a little bit if we have time, and a little bit of MLB opening week, because that is now, right? So, without further ado, excuse me, sorry, let's get into it. If you guys can't tell, I just woke up from a nap. So, bear with me. I'm just kidding. I'll be the goated. But anyways, let's continue on. All right. So, sorry it's not on PFF today, because I actually ran out of draft slots, because you can only have so many free drafts a day. But anyways, it's going to be a pretty simple draft here. What up, Bennett, in the chat? I see you. But anyways, it's going to be pretty simple, little mock draft. We love to do mock drafts here. But let's go ahead and get into it. So, in every single mock draft I've done so far, since 1.0, 2.0, 3.0, and now in the 4.0, the first pick has been the exact same, and it's not going to change today. It's going to be Cameron Ward out of Miami going to the Tennessee Titans. Like I said, I don't really need to explain it. And as draft day comes closer and closer, we're 23 days away, I believe. We're 21 days away. So 3 weeks from the draft. I don't really need to explain this move. This pick looks like it's going to happen more and more each day. Private workouts, interviews, all that has been happening between the Titans organization and Cameron Ward. So it's looking more and more like this is going to be the pick. Don't really need to say much about that one. Next. Cleveland, they re-signed. Since the last mock draft, they actually ended up re-signing Myles Garrett. And, in the previous mock drafts, I had him taking Abdul Carter with the second overall pick. And I still think they are, to be honest. I love bringing in Myles Garrett and still having Abdul Carter because, edge, you get two. And if Abdul Carter is going to play like this Micah Parsons role that, people think is possible, I think that's a great fit for Cleveland defensively. And defensively, Cleveland has a very good unit. And I wouldn't be surprised if they tried to keep it good. And, there is some question marks, right? For Cleveland, you really don't have a quarterback right now. Your quarterback is Kenny Pickett, which, no shade at all to Kenny Pickett. We got Steelers fans in the chat. I'm sure they don't hate Kenny Pickett, but, it's going to be interesting to see what the Browns do, obviously. They have, very limited on offense, in my opinion. And, to keep going with that, it's they got David Njoku. They lose Elijah Moore. He's still a free agent. Nick Chubb is still a free agent. The offense is really in shambles right now. I don't foresee Deshaun Watson playing a snap this year. So it's looking like, kind of question mark for the offense. But I still think they go with Abdul Carter just because the offensive players right now, that are available, in my opinion, are not worth a second overall pick, right? So you look at, the next 3 offensive players on the board in terms of who you'd want to draft at skill positions, right? You see, it's Ashton Jeanty, Shedeur Sanders, and Tutorial McMillan, which all 3 are great players and generational. I wouldn't be surprised if Ashton Jeanty goes top 4 in a trade, but I think 2 is a little bit OD for Ashton Jeanty, and I don't see the Browns picking Shadur Sanders. I don't think Shadur Sanders is worthy of a top 5 pick. And Torrey McMillan, I can only see it going earliest at 8. So really, I think you can't skip out on a generational edge rusher like Abdul Carter. Worry about paying him later. You obviously, there's a lot to be figured out with the Deshaun Watson contract and all that good stuff. But I say, keep Abdul Carter. Like, you can't pass up on that. With that being said, number 3, third overall pick, owned by the New York Giants. You bring in Russell Wilson and Jameis Winston, having them compete for a starting job. But it's going to be Russell Wilson to win that job. And Russell Wilson is a quarterback, despite the age and despite what we've seen. I think he's a guy who's going to give you 8 or 9 wins, and he's going to try and put you in a position to get you into the playoffs. And obviously, this Giants team, offensively and defensively, is not that great. Defensively, I do like their defense. I think their defense, is very underrated, especially after this free agency period. But, there's still some, outlying needs at corner. Really at wide receiver, you have Malik Neighbors, and you bring back Darius Slayton. But, other than that, you really don't have another playmaker on the offensive side of the ball. You really hope that running back from Purdue, I forget his name, but you really hope that he pans out. So, I think you go with the gadget guy, the Heisman winner, Travis Hunter. I think Travis Hunter goes to New York. Once again, I think these 3 picks have been the exact same since the previous mock draft. But give me Travis Hunter to go to the New York Giants. Number 4, the Patriots. Honestly, if I'm being real, 4 and 5 overall picks are picks to me that seem tradable. Like, the team is going to trade out, especially the Jacksonville pick. I think is the one I'm most confident in that a team is going to trade up. But, I'm not going to do mock or trades in this mock draft just because, really and truly, it's so unpredictable, especially with the compensation and everything. That's just a really hard thing to propose. But for me personally, if I'm the New England Patriots at number 4, you're at a spot where the top 3 guys I think are pretty solidified, especially now. Like, after doing the past 2 or 3 mock drafts, these past 3 guys have kind of been my 1, 2, and 3 since the beginning. So I think these top 3 guys are for sure top 3 guys. But at 4, really, it's been a toss-up. I mean, you have, Ashton Jeanty, obviously. You got Will Campbell, Mason Graham, Armand Mimbu, Will Johnson, Shadur Sanders, all these guys, even guys like Jalen Walker, could even make a jump. So, with that being said, I have the Patriots drafting Armand Mimbu. And to me, Armand Mimbu is really a generational talent at the tackle position. I mean, we haven't seen someone more athletic or with more raw power than him in a long time, since Trent Williams, really and truly. So, it just makes sense. Vrabel and the Patriots have been massive spenders in free agency so far. I think it's clear to me that they're trying to get Drake May as much help as possible. They bring in Stephon Diggs, they address the offensive line, they bring in Garrett Bradbury to play center and Moses Morgan to play right tackle, and I think they stay on the trend of improving the offensive line by bringing him in. But you have Cole Strange to play left guard, and Cole Strange wasn't that great last year, but I think there's still definitely some potential there for him to even be just an average left guard. But potentially getting Armand Mimbu at left tackle, a generational talent at left tackle, I think that could be huge for Drake May, and could really honestly kind of turn this Patriots offense that was so bad last year into a decent offense. Like, I honestly don't think their offense is that bad, especially with the addition of Diggs. Diggs can be that alpha receiver. You have Pop Douglas, who is a great slot guy and is kind of been an underrated receiver the past 2 years, and Kayshon Boutte, who is kind of, he was hurt his rookie year, and nobody really paid attention to him. And then at the end of last season comes in, has a 100-yard game in the last game, and I'm really confident in a guy like Kayshon Boutte. I really like him. I drafted him in my Dynasty League. Like, I've been on this guy for a couple of years now, so I really like it. Anyways, number 5. So this is the pick I think would get traded down the most, just purely because in my opinion, Mason Graham is not going to go in the top 5. And I think Jacksonville knows that. So they're going to trade back to like 8, in my opinion. So, but hold on. Just realized that wasn't on. You see, this nap killed me. Anyways, I still haven't taken Mason Graham. Best defensive lineman in this class. Not going to be surprised if the Jags trade back and still make the same move. But it feels like the right pick, and it's the only one that makes sense here. And I don't think there's really much more to say. Jacksonville needs a lot. But, and being able to get draft capital by pushing back, or trading back to a 10 or an 8, somewhere in that zone, it's really good for you. And the reason why I say like moving back to 10 is because the Raiders are in a spot where I think it's a hard pick, really and truly. I think they do go offense here. They could really go anywhere, offense or defense. But it's just a matter of like who they want. They brought in Geno Smith, they brought in Raheem Mostert. But I do think the pick here, it's either going to be Gene or Shedeur Sanders. Even with Geno getting an extension 3 hours ago, I do still think that, it's kind of, we saw the Falcons do the same thing. You bring in Kirk Cousins on a 4-year, $180 million deal, but you draft his replacement at pick 8. And I wouldn't be surprised if the Raiders kind of do the same thing here. I mean, it kind of worked for the Falcons, right? Michael Penix did look great in his last 4 starts. And, it kind of came at a time where Kirk Cousins kind of leveled out playing-wise. And Geno Smith is a guy who's kind of at almost that same age as Kirk Cousins. Definitely still has a little more left in the tank, in my opinion. But I definitely think there's a scenario where they still draft Shedeur Sanders or Ashton GT. So that's why if I were to have a trade, it would be Chicago moving up to number 5 to pick GT. But for the sake of this draft, the Raiders will be selecting Shedeur Sanders out of Colorado. It's been a pick, Shedeur Sanders has been tied to, the New York Giants, the Raiders for, just about all season long, right? So it's going to be Shedeur, in my opinion. It makes sense, I think they've talked about, wanting Shedeur in Vegas. So there it is. Next up, number 7 is the Jets. And the Jets honestly kind of have a really awkward pick. Like, they're not in a great spot, particularly for this draft, because, you don't want to reach on anyone excuse me, but you don't want to reach on like a Kelvin Banks or a Shamar Stewart or a Ted McMillan or even a Matthew Golden or a James Pierce Jr., Nick Emuwar. There's a lot of guys where you could reach on at the 7th pick, but you're kind of at the mercy of the 6 teams ahead of you, right? So, like, is, Mason Graham or Amon Mimbu going to fall to you? Is Travis Hunter going to fall? Like, there's a lot of question marks, right? But, for this, I think if Armand Mimbu falls, he stops at 7 because I think it's the match made in heaven. But, just as good as Armand Mimbu is Will Campbell. And I think Will Campbell is the pick here at number 7. The talent with Campbell, it's really undeniable. And the Jets do need help on the O-line. Campbell looks to be a generational offensive tackle, but, it's just a matter of size for him. The hands, the arm length, it was like, that was the big question in the draft, and that's been the big question since. But, the tape is undeniable. And what we saw at LSU, he was great. So, in my opinion, like, I think the Will Campbell pick, that there shouldn't be a hesitation, really and truly. And I do think, there's a world where Will Campbell does go top 12, and it's really not a bad thing, for Will Campbell about his size. So I have Will Campbell going to the Jets, tackle from LSU. Good stuff there. Next is the Carolina Panthers. And in the past 3 mock drafts, I've had the Carolina Panthers going defense, getting an edge rusher, either a Jalen Walker or a Mykel Williams kind of piece. But, recently, not that the edges have been falling, but the offensive players have kind of been getting, a little more talked about. We've been hearing more about Gene T going, potentially top 6 pick. We've been seeing, guys like Matthew Golden rise out of Texas. We've been seeing Tech McMillan stock kind of come back, because there was a point where Tech McMillan was really looking like he was going to be a picked in the teens. So it's going to be interesting to see what the Panthers do with this pick. Obviously, you see the needs; they need a lot, but I think they get a receiver here, and I think it is Tatoria McMillan. the Panthers need a lot. And, the late season surge with Bryce Young last season, I think they made the Panthers front office and coaching staff realize that Bryce Young does need weapons, right? Yes, Jalen Coker is good, but he shouldn't be he shouldn't be, your starting wide receiver. He's trustable, but he shouldn't be your starting wide receiver. Xavier Legette has shown a little, but I do still think there's a lot of question marks with Xavier Legette. As much as I love him personality-wise and as a player, it's like, the production wasn't elite, and he kind of showed a little bit, but it wasn't, anything that like a Xavier Worthy was shown, or a Ladd McConkey, or Brock Bauer. Like, we didn't see that kind of production. And, Adam Thielen, he's good, but he's getting old. And, we saw he had one of his best seasons of his career 2 years ago. Then this season was a little bit worse, and I think the trend's just going to continue, in my opinion. So I think getting a Tatoria McMillan, a guy who can truly stretch it deep, that's kind of an area where they lack. I think their best deep ball stretcher is DJ Moore, or David Moore from Seattle. But you get a guy like Tet McMillan who can stretch it deep. You can let Xavier Legette play a more middle of the field role. Adam Thielen in that same way. So, I do like the Tet McMillan pick here a lot for Carolina. Next is this is a pick we had in our last mock draft. It's Jalen Walker to the Saints. It's just really a match made in heaven, I think. He didn't test at the combine. Skills, he's going to be a top 10 pick in my opinion. I really do think so. He just looks like generational. And people are really, especially in the NFL, I think executives, GMs, and coaches are looking for this Micah Parsons kind of build for a player. So that's why names like Abdul Carter or Jalen Walker have been kind of thrown around so much, is because they want that hybrid edge, kind of can play linebacker, off-ball linebacker / edge rusher. I think that's a position that's starting to be developed here in the NFL. So I think it's going to happen. He can be so helpful against the rush and in the passing game. And talent-wise, I think he's one of the best players in this class. Definitely top 5 in terms of talent. So I do think the Saints bring him in here. So give me Jalen Walker to the Saints. Next is another pick that is the same. It's Ashton Jeanty to the Bears. And, I wouldn't be surprised if the Bears even trade up, because I do think there's a legitimate threat that the Raiders take Jeanty at 6, so I wouldn't be surprised if the Bears are the ones to move up at 5 and take Jeanty. But, Ben Johnson, I said it last time we did a mock draft, he loves his running backs, and he's already made a couple moves on the O-line, so bringing in Jeanty is going to be elite. It's just a match made in heaven, and that offense should be unstoppable. Even if they don't, re-sign Keenan Allen, you still have DJ Moore, you still have Rome Odunze, who's I think Rome Odunze could be a great player in the NFL, and you just need Caleb Williams to just play football. We've seen he can. He won a Heisman, but we need to see that translate into the NFL, and maybe next season's it, because we didn't really see it that much last season, but I do think we can see it this season, for sure. Especially if you bring in Ashton Jeanty, have that offense be a little more dynamic. You fix the O-line a little bit with Ben Johnson, so it's going to be a very interesting pick. Number 11, we got the San Francisco 49ers, and I literally think I've changed this pick every mock draft, because it doesn't, there hasn't been something concrete for the 49ers all offseason, but until now, after free agency, I think it's very clear that the 49ers need interior defensive line help and offensive line help. So the pick is either going to be D-line or O-line, but the spot the 49ers are in, you're kind of too late. Maybe a Will Campbell will fall, or an Armand Mimbu will fall to you at 11. But I'm not really comfortable taking a Kelvin Banks, or even let me go in here. So a Kelvin Banks or a Josh Simmons or a Josh Connerly. I'm not confident in taking that guy at 11. Same with Gray Zabel, Tyler Booker. But I do think there is interior defensive linemen that are going to be available here. And I think the one that makes the most sense, and from what we've seen post-combine and post-free agency, one of the biggest risers recently, which is very late, is Walter Nolan, which, he had some character concerns, but we've been seeing him on the rise, and he's interviewing really well. Teams seem to really like him. So I would not be surprised if Walter Nolan is the pick here. If not Walter Nolan, it could be a Shamar Stewart kind of guy. But, Walter Nolan at 11, where the interior defensive line sucks, and Walter Nolan can put in the work and be a great player there. So take a sip of water, and then we're going to continue. All right, so number 12 is the Dallas Cowboys. And really, truly, the Cowboys are once again kind of in a bad spot. Maybe not really in a bad spot, but I think you need a little bit of help at DB. And Will Johnson is obviously an option here. But I don't foresee, it's just the corners in this class are looking weaker and weaker. Will Johnson has been falling in a lot of mocks. Same with Malachi Starks, Nick Ebenwari even. There's not a lot of DB room, So with that being said, the Cowboys, I have them taking Matthew Golden, the receiver out of Texas. They need a lot of help. The front office doesn't like to spend money. Jerry Jones sucks. But, offensively, CeeDee Lamb also needs help. He's the only receiver they have. You look at the roster, it's CeeDee Lamb, Jalen Tolbert, and, I don't even know. And, obviously, they need help. And I think Matthew Golden is a great compliment to CeeDee Lamb. CeeDee Lamb, you can put him in the slot, and he's fast, one of your best receivers. One of the best receivers in the league, I mean. And you get a guy like Matthew Golden who has the potential to stretch it deep and looked really good at Houston and then looked really good at Texas. Excuse me. I really like Matthew Golden pick here. Next is the Miami Dolphins. And as we get closer to draft time, I do feel like the pick for Miami, I do think it's going to be some sort of DB. There's a lot of guys that could go here. We have Jahdae Barron. They have, Will Johnson, Malachi Starks, Matthew Hairston, Nick Ebenwari. There's a lot of guys that can go at this spot because, excuse me. Sorry. The Miami Dolphins need a lot of help on defense. But I do think the pick is still going to be Malachi Starks. I mean, he's the closest thing, in my opinion, in this draft to Javon Holland. And I think the most important thing in this draft for Miami should be replacing Javon Holland, which is kind of what I've seen in other mocks and stuff. But, we didn't see them address it in free agency, really, where they didn't really bring in a safety that could replace Javon Holland's level of play. So I think they have to draft a safety here, and I think it's going to be Malachi Starks. Next is the Indianapolis Colts. And this is a pick that has been the same in all 4 mock drafts, which is Tyler Warren. It's just such a gimme. It makes so much sense. It's just the best. It just makes so much sense. AR needs to help, and the way that they'll be able to use Tyler Warren in Indianapolis makes so much sense, and it's just such a beautiful fit, in my opinion. So, Tyler Warren to Indianapolis, I'm not going to say much about that. Next is the Falcons, and the Falcons, we need, as a Falcons fan, we need a lot of help, right? They can go anywhere. Especially, you look at who's available. It's Will Johnson, Shamar Stewart, Mykel Williams, James Pierce Jr., Mike Green. So there's a lot of, spots they can go. But I have them taking, once again, I have them taking Jahad Campbell. And here's the thing. Will Terry Fontenot draft edge? I don't think so. And it sucks. It sucks, but they never address it. The Falcons have had this we tried to bring in Judon, I guess, but obviously that didn't work out. And I just don't find them addressing it. Maybe they address it in the second round, and maybe they go corner in the second round. I don't know, but it doesn't really make sense. But for my sanity, I'll at least have him taking Jahad Campbell. I think there's a very real possibility that Will Johnson is the pick there, which is kind of scary. But I have him taking Jahad Campbell. And Jahad Campbell, he's a great inside linebacker, and he can line up on the edge when he needs to, which the Falcons did do a lot of with linebackers last season, which was lining them up and sending him on blitzes a lot. So, I think it's a fit that makes a lot of sense. But, also I do think we still need to pick an edge rusher. You know, hopefully we do it in the second round or something. I don't know. But that's who I have my Falcons taking. That's another pick that's the same. But we have the Cardinals. And for the Cardinals, once again, just like the San Francisco 49ers, I think it's going to be either O-line or defensive line kind of pick. And I'm going to go with an edge rusher, and I'm going to go with Shamar Stewart. He's becoming more and more of that true edge, which we've seen from this, like in this offseason. Like he was a tweener to start, and especially pre-combine, pre-senior bowl and all that. He was kind of seen as a tweener, and now he's slimmed down a lot, and he looks to be a true edge rusher. So I like it, honestly. Insanely athletic, one of the most like insane like raw athletic scores in combine history, compared to his former Texas A&M player Myles Garrett. So hopefully Shamar Stewart can pull that off. But I do think there's a spot in him for this league, especially excuse me, in that pure athleticism kind of role. So give me Shamar Stewart to the Cardinals. Next, we got the Bengals. And I think, the Bengals can go in a lot of spaces, or a lot of places, sorry. And given with what's available, I think it is going to be Will Johnson. It just makes a lot of sense, It's Will Johnson. He's a generational player, right? He had a great season before he got hurt, and he was really great in 2023 as well. So the slip stops here. I mean, really, we haven't seen a lot of DBs, and I do think the DBs are going to slip and fall in the draft as well. So Will Johnson slip stops there, and he goes to the Bengals. Next, we have the Seattle Seahawks, and I have the Seahawks going Kelvin Banks, which I really like this pick, especially if Kelvin Banks is available at 18 for Seattle. Seattle needs a lot of O-line help, especially, man, if they bringing in Sam Darnold was such an awful idea. But if they're bringing in Sam Darnold, they need to protect him, because when he's not protected, he's awful. So I think getting an offensive lineman should be the Seattle Seahawks' number one priority in this draft. And I think they get a really good one in Kelvin Banks. Kelvin Banks is a great player. He could play multiple different positions on the O-line. I think they'll be fine if they just landed like a Kelvin Banks Jr. in this year's draft. Next is the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I have them taking Mike Green. See if I can find him. There he is, Mike Green out of Marshall. 17 sacks last season. That's really all I got to say. Just kidding. No, but he's a great pass rusher. One of my favorite edge rushers in this class. Has a little bit of concern with some allegations coming out. We don't know the validity or the truth of those allegations, so I'm just going to leave it at that. But, I still do think, there's a spot for him in this league. 17 sacks, great pass rusher, extremely deep repertoire for his size. Like, he's going to be great in the NFL. So give me Mike Green to the Buccaneers. Next is the Denver Broncos. Whew, sorry. That nap hit a little too hard. But for the Denver Broncos, I have them. The rise keeps coming on this guy, I think. And I have him taking Omarion Hampton out of North Carolina. I mean, great running back. Clearly the number 2 best running back in this class. And honestly, very close to number 1, in my opinion. But I think it's really looking like Hampton is going to be a first-round pick. And I wouldn't be surprised if he goes as high as this, But Denver needs a running back really bad. And Hampton's going to be elite. Like, you look at the Denver running back room right now, and it's like Audric Estime and Jaleel McLaughlin. Like, it's pretty rough. So they need a running back, and I wouldn't be surprised if it's Omarion Hampton. Sorry, guys, my nose is a little itchy. Next is the Steelers. My poor Steelers, man. The Steelers have kind of put themselves in such a bad position in this draft, because they have defensive needs that they need to cover, in my opinion, and running back needs that they need to cover. But, the running backs will come in the later rounds of the draft. I'm not worried about that. But defensively, you could use a Jahdae Barron, immensely. You could use a Derek Harmon. You could use a Nick Eamon-Wari. You could use a Siobhan Revelle. You could use a Benjamin Morrison, but I don't know if you're getting these guys. Because instead, you're not getting a quarterback. like you forced yourself to pick Jackson Dart with your first overall pick, which is awful in my opinion. I like this quarterback class is so bad. It's literally like picking Kenny Pickett all over again in my opinion. Like, are you just going to run like four verts the whole game? Jackson Dart is not going to translate into the NFL. He's just a deep ball merchant, and it's a lot of the same stuff with Zach Wilson. It just feels like Zach Wilson 2.0 in my opinion. Like you see the deep ball, and you're just like, whoa, holy cow, we got to pick this guy, and you pick him number 2 overall. It's not the same in that regard, but you see a deep ball, and you're like in a lackluster QB class, and you're like, holy cow, I got to take this guy, and that's kind of like what I think has been going on with Jackson Dart, and I don't agree with this pick at all. Like Jackson Dart's it's not gonna translate, and I just don't foresee it working at all. But anyways, sorry about that. Next up, we got the Chargers and Los Angeles Chargers. I think once again that Harbaugh gets this guy in Colston Loveland. It just is a move a lot